The Papal Archbasilica of St. John in Lateran, commonly known as St. John Lateran Archbasilica, St. John Lateran Basilica, St. John Lateran, or simply the Lateran Basilica, is the cathedral church of Rome, Italy, and therefore houses the cathedra, or ecclesiastical seat, of the Roman Pontiff. It is the oldest of and has precedence among the four papal major basilicas, all of which are in Rome. Because it is the oldest church in the West and houses the cathedra of the Roman Pontiff, it has the title of Ecumenical Mother Church of the Roman Catholic Faithful. The current archpriest is Agostino Vallini, Cardinal Vicar General for the Diocese of Rome. The President of the French Republic, currently François Hollande, is ex officio the first and only honorary canon of the Archbasilica, a title that the heads of state of France have possessed since King Henry IV. The large Latin inscription on the facade reads, Clemens 12 Pont Max Sano vi Cristo Salvatore in hon SS Johann Baptista Vang, which is a highly abbreviated inscription which translates to, Pope Clement XII, in the 5th year, dedicated this building to Christ the Saviour, in honor of Saints John the Baptist and John the Evangelist. The inscription indicates, along with its full title, that the Archbasilica was originally dedicated to Christ the Saviour and, centuries later, co-dedicated to St. John the Baptist and St. John the Evangelist. As the cathedral of the Pope qua Bishop of Rome, it ranks superior to all other churches of the Roman Catholic Church, including St. Peter's Basilica, and therefore it alone is titled Archbasilica among all other basilicas. The Archbasilica is sited in the city of Rome, outside and distanced from Vatican City proper, which is approximately 4 kilometers to its northwest. Although the Archbasilica and its adjoining edifices have extraterritorial status from Italy as one of the properties of the Holy See, subject to the sovereignty of the latter, pursuant to the Lateran Treaty of 1929 with Italy. Etymology. The Archbasilica's Latin name is Archibasilica Sanctissimi Salvatoris e Sanctorum Johannes Baptista e Evangelista in Laterano, which in English is Archbasilica of the Most Holy Saviour and Saints John the Baptist and the Evangelist in the Lateran, and in Italian Archibasilica del Santissimo Salvatore e Santi Giovanni Battista ed Evangelista in Laterano. Lateran Palace. The Archbasilica stands over the remains of the Castrum Novaricatum Singularium, the new fort of the Roman Imperial Cavalry bodyguards. The fort was established by Septimius Severus in AD 193. Following the victory of Emperor Constantine I over Maxentius at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, the guard was abolished and the fort demolished. Substantial remains of the fort lie directly beneath the nave. The remainder of the site was occupied during the early Roman Empire by the palace of the gens Laterani. Sextius Lateranus was the first plebeian to attain the rank of consul, and the Laterani served as administrators for several emperors. One of the Laterani, consul designate Plautius Lateranus, became famous for being accused by Nero of conspiracy against the emperor. The accusation resulted in the confiscation and redistribution of his properties. The Lateran palace fell into the hands of the emperor when Constantine I married his second wife Fausta, sister of Maxentius, known by that time as the Domus Faustae, or House of Fausta. The Lateran palace was eventually given to the Bishop of Rome by Constantine I. The actual date of the donation is unknown, but scholars speculate that it was during the pontificate of Pope Miltiades, in time to host a synod of bishops in 313 that was convened to challenge the Donatist schism, declaring Donatism to be heresy. The palace basilica was converted and extended, becoming the residence of Pope St. Sylvester Arn, eventually becoming the Cathedral of Rome, the seat of the Pope's squire, the bishops of Rome. The Middle Ages. Pope Sylvester I presided over the official dedication of the Archbasilica and the adjacent Lateran Palace in 324, declaring both to be a Domus Dei. The papal cathedra was placed in its interior, rendering it the cathedral of the Pope qua Bishop of Rome. On the Archbasilica's front wall between the main portals is a plaque inscribed with the words Sacrosancta Lateranensis Ecclesia Omnium Urbis A, Orbis Ecclesiae Mater et Caput, which translate to Most Holy Lateran Church of all the churches in the city and the world. The mother and head, a visible indication of the Archbasilica's claim to be the Mother Church of all the world. The Archbasilica and Lateran Palace were rededicated twice. Pope Sergius III dedicated them to St. John the Baptist in the 10th century in honor of the newly consecrated baptistry of the Archbasilica. Pope Lucius II dedicated them to St. John the Evangelist in the 12th century. Thus, St. John the Baptist and St. John the Evangelist are co-patrons of the Archbasilica, while the primary patron is Christ the Saviour, as the inscription in the entrance indicates and as is traditional for patriarchal cathedrals. Consequently, the Archbasilica remains dedicated to the Saviour, and its titular feast is the Feast of the Transfiguration. The Archbasilica became the most important shrine of the two St. Johns, albeit infrequently jointly venerated. In later years, a Benedictine monastery was established in the Lateran Palace, and was devoted to serving the Archbasilica and the two saints. Every pope, beginning with Pope Miltiades, occupied the Lateran Palace until the reign of the French Pope Clement V, who in 1309 transferred the seat of the papacy to Avignon, a papal fiefdom that was an enclave in France. The Lateran Palace has also been the site of 5 ecumenical councils. Lateran Fires. During the time the papacy was seated in Avignon, France, the Lateran Palace and the Archbasilica deteriorated. 2 fires ravaged them in 1307 and 1361. After both fires, the Pope sent money from Avignon to pay for the reconstruction and maintenance. Nonetheless, the Archbasilica and Lateran Palace lost the former splendor. When the papacy returned from Avignon and the Pope again resided in Rome, the Archbasilica and the Lateran Palace were deemed inadequate considering their accumulated damage. The popes resided at the Basilica di Santa Maria in Trastevere and later at the Basilica di Santa Maria Maggiore. Eventually, the Palace of the Vatican was built adjacent to the Basilica of St. Peter, which existed since the time of Emperor Constantine I, and the popes began to reside there. Since then the popes have continued to reside there, with the exception of Pope Francis, who resides elsewhere within Vatican City. Reconstruction. There were several attempts at reconstruction of the Archbasilica before a definitive program of Pope Sixtus V. Sixtus V had his favorite architect, Domenico Fontana, to supervise much of the project. The original Lateran Palace was demolished and replaced with a new edifice. On the square in front of the Lateran Palace is the largest standing obelisk in the world, known as the Lateran Obelisk. It weighs an estimated 455 tons. It was commissioned by the Egyptian pharaoh Thutmose III and erected by Thutmose IV before the Great Karnak Temple of Thebes, Egypt, intended by Emperor Constantine I to be shipped to Constantinople. The very preoccupied Constantius II had it shipped instead to Rome, where it was erected in the Circus Maximus in AD 357. At some time it broke and was buried under the circus. In the 16th century it was discovered and excavated, and Sixtus V had it re-erected on a new pedestal on the 3rd of August 1588 at its present site. Further renovation of the interior of the Archbasilica ensued under the direction of Francesco Borromini, commissioned by Pope Innocent X. The 12 niches created by his architectural scheme were eventually filled in 1718 with statues of the Apostles, sculpted by the most prominent Roman Rococo sculptors. The vision of Pope Clement XII for reconstruction was an ambitious one in which he launched a competition to design a new facade. More than 23 architects competed, mostly working in the then-current Baroque idiom. The putatively impartial jury was chaired by Sebastiano Conca, president of the Roman Academy of St. Luke. The winner of the competition was Alessandro Galilei. The facade as it appears today was completed in 1735. It reads in Latin, Clemens 12 Pont Max Sano vi Cristo Salvatore in hon SS Joan Baptista Vang. This highly abbreviated inscription is expanded thus, Clemens 12 Pont Max Anno vi Cristo Salvatore in hon Joan Baptista Vang. This translates as Pope Clement XII, in the 5th year of his reign, dedicated this building to Christ the Saviour, in honor of Saints John the Baptist and John the Evangelist. Galilei's facade removed all vestiges of traditional ancient basilical architecture and imparted a neoclassical facade. World War II. During the Second World War, the Lateran and its related buildings were used under Pope Pius XII as a safe haven from the Nazis and Italian fascists for numbers of Jews and other refugees. Among those who found shelter there were Muccio Ruini, Alcide de Gasperi, Pietro Nenni and others. The Daughters of Charity of St. Vincent de Paul and the 60 orphan refugees they cared for were ordered to leave the convent on the Via Carlo Emmanuel. The Sisters of Maria Bambina, who staffed the kitchen at the Pontifical Major Roman Seminary at the Lateran, offered a wing of their convent. The grounds also housed Italian soldiers. Vincenzo Faggiolo and Pietro Palazzini, vice-rector of the seminary, were recognized by Yad Vashem for their efforts to assistance Jews. Architectural history. An apse lined with mosaics and open to the air still preserves the memory of one of the most famous halls of the ancient palace, the triclinium of Pope Leo III, which was the state banqueting hall. The existing structure is not ancient, but some portions of the original mosaics may have been preserved in the tripartite mosaic of its niche. In the center, Christ gives to the apostles the mission. On the left, he gives the keys of the kingdom of heaven to Pope Street, Sylvester, and the labyrinth to Emperor Constantine I, and on the right, Pope Street, Peter gives the papal stole to Pope Leo III and the standard to Charlemagne. Some few remains of the original buildings may still be traced in the city walls outside the gate of St. John, and a large wall decorated with paintings was uncovered in the 18th century within the Archbasilica behind the Lancelotti Chapel. A few traces of older buildings were also revealed during the excavations of 1880, when the work of extending the apse was in progress, but nothing of importance was published. A great many donations from the popes and other benefactors to the Archbasilica are recorded in the Liber Pontificalis, and its splendor at an early period was such that it became known as the Basilica Aurea, or Golden Basilica. This splendor drew upon it the attack of the Vandals, who stripped it of all its treasures. Pope Leo I restored it around AD 460, and it was again restored by Pope Hadrian. In 897, it was almost totally destroyed by an earthquake. Ab altare uscad portus cessidit. The damage was so extensive that it was difficult to trace the lines of the old building, but these were mostly respected and the new building was of the same dimensions as the old. This second basilica stood for 400 years before it burned in 1308. It was rebuilt by Pope Clement V and Pope John XXII. It burned once more in 1360, and was rebuilt by Pope Urban V. Through vicissitudes, the Archbasilica retained its ancient form, being divided by rows of columns into aisles, and having in front a peristyle surrounded by colonnades with a fountain in the middle, the conventional late antique format that was also followed by the old St. Peter's Basilica. The facade had 3 windows and was embellished with a mosaic representing Christ as the Savior of the world. The porticos were frescoed, probably not earlier than the 12th century, commemorating the Roman fleet under Vespasian, the taking of Jerusalem, the baptism of Emperor Constantine I, and his donation of the Papal States to the Catholic Church. Inside the Archbasilica, the columns no doubt ran, as in all other basilicas of the same date, the whole length of the church, from east to west. In one of the rebuildings, probably that which was carried out by Pope Clement V, a transverse nave was introduced, imitated no doubt from the one which had been added, long before this, to the Basilica of St. Paul outside the walls. Probably at this time the Archbasilica was enlarged. Some portions of the older buildings survive, among them the pavement of medieval cosmatesque work, and the statues of St. Peter and St. Paul, now in the cloister. The graceful baldacchino over the high altar, which looks out of place in its present surroundings, dates from 1369. The stercore area, or throne of red marble on which the Pope sat, is now in the Vatican museums. It owes its unsavory name to the anthem sung at previous papal coronations, De Stercore Erigens Pauperum. For the 5th century, there were 7 oratories surrounding the Archbasilica. These before long were incorporated into the church. The devotion of visiting these oratories, which was maintained through the medieval ages, gave rise to the similar devotion of the 7 altars, still common in many churches of Rome and elsewhere. Of the facade by Alessandro Galilei, the cliché assessment has ever been that it is the facade of a palace, not of a church. Galilei's front, which is a screen across the older front creating a narthex of vestibule, does express the nave and double aisles of the Archbasilica, which required a central bay wider than the rest of the sequence. Galilei provided it without abandoning the range of identical arch-headed openings, by extending the central window by flanking columns that support the arch in the familiar Serlian motif, by bringing the central bay forward very slightly, and capping it with a pediment that breaks into the roof balustrade. Galilei provided an entrance doorway on a more than colossal scale, framed in the colossal Corinthian pilasters that tie together the facade in the manner introduced at Michelangelo's palace on the Campidoglio. Statues of the Apostles. The 12 niches created in Francesco Borromini's architecture were left vacant for decades, when in 1702 Pope Clement XI and Benedetto Cardinal Pamphili, archpriests of the Archbasilica, announced the grand scheme for 12 sculptures of the Apostles, of greater than life size, to fill the niches. The commission was open to all the premier sculptors of late Baroque Rome. Each statue was to be sponsored by an illustrious prince, with the Pope himself sponsoring that of St. Peter and Cardinal Pamphili that of St. John the Evangelist. Most of the sculptors were given a sketch drawn by Pope Clement's favorite painter, Carlo Maratta, to which they were to adhere, but with the notable exception being Pierre Le Gros the Younger, who successfully refused to sculpt to Maratta's design and consequently was not given a sketch. The sculptors and the sculptures follow and are dated according to Conforti. Papal tombs. There are 6 extant papal tombs inside the Archbasilica: Alexander III, Pope Sergius IV, Pope Clement XII Corsini, Pope Martin V, Pope Innocent III, and Pope Leo XIII by Gittadellini. The last of these, Pope Leo XIII, was the last pope not to be entombed in St. Peter's Basilica. 12 additional papal tombs were constructed in the Archbasilica starting in the 10th century, but were destroyed during the 2 fires that ravaged it in 1308 and 1361. The remains of these charred tombs were gathered and reburied in a polyandrum. The popes whose tombs were destroyed are Pope John X, Pope Agapetus II, Pope John XII, Pope Pascal II, Pope Calixtus II, Pope Honorius II, Pope Celestine II, Pope Lucius II, Pope Anastasius IV, Pope Clement III, Pope Celestine III, and Pope Innocent V. Popes who reigned during this period, whose tombs are unknown, and who may have been buried in the Archbasilica include Pope John XVII, Pope John XVIII, and Pope Alexander II. Pope John X was the first pope buried within the walls of Rome, and was granted a prominent burial due to rumors that he was murdered by Theodora during a historical period known as the Saeculum Obscurum. Cardinals Vincenzo Santucci and Carlo Colonna are also buried in the Archbasilica. Lateran cloister. Between the Archbasilica and the city wall there was in former times a great monastery, in which dwelt a community of monks whose duty it was to provide the services in the Archbasilica. The only part of it which still survives is the 13th century cloister, surrounded by graceful, twisted columns of inlaid marble. They are of a style intermediate between the Romanesque proper and the Gothic, and are the work of Vasilectus and the Cosmati. Lateran Baptistry. The octagonal Lateran Baptistry stands somewhat apart from the Archbasilica. It was founded by Pope Sixtus III, perhaps on an earlier structure, for a legend arose that Emperor Constantine I was baptized there and enriched the edifice. The baptistry was for many generations the only baptistry in Rome, and its octagonal structure, centered upon the large basin for full immersions, provided a model for others throughout Italy, and even an iconic motif of illuminated manuscripts known as the Fountain of Life. Holy Stairs. The Scala Sancta, or Holy Stairs, are white marble steps encased in wooden ones. According to Catholic tradition, they form the staircase which once led to the praetorium of Pontius Pilate in Jerusalem, and which, therefore, were sanctified by the footsteps of Jesus Christ during his passion. The marble stairs are visible through openings in the wooden rises. Their translation from Jerusalem to the Lateran Palace in the 4th century is credited to Saint Empress Helena, the mother of the then Emperor Constantine I. In 1589, Pope Sixtus V relocated the steps to the present location in front of the ancient Palatine chapel named the Sancta Sanctorum. Ferrao Fenzoni completed some of the frescoes on the walls. Feast of the Dedication of the Archbasilica. In the liturgical calendar of the Catholic Church, the 9th of November is the feast of the dedication of the Basilica of the Lateran, and is referred to in older texts as the dedication of the Basilica of the Holy Saviour, in view of its role as the Mother Church of the world. This liturgical day is celebrated worldwide as a feast, and not a memorial as might be expected. Archpriests. Pope Boniface VIII instituted the office of Archpriest of the Archbasilica circa 1299. List of Archpriests of the Archbasilica. Gallery.